Love is wonderful. Love never fades. There is no deeper.
As we've been going through this series on what the Bible says and what the Bible means to us, we've sung this next song a few times. I introduced it a few weeks ago, Ancient Words. So I figured it's most appropriate this week to close out this series, not only with a message from Josh, but with this musical mindset to remind us of the words that have come in the past and where they've been and where they will go. Because those ancient words that have been with us today are still going to be with us tomorrow, next year, that century, forever, because they're here, they're ancient, and they're always been. So, as you feel led, please sing along with us.
Changing me, we have come with open Ancient words changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts, let the ancient words be taught. We have come with open hearts, let the ancient words be taught.
Lord, we come to you with thanksgiving that you have sent your words and your spirit to be with us in the past and in the future. Lord, help us to find a way to set down some of the things that we walked in here today to be fully present with ourselves and with you. And Lord, I pray that you are able to reveal yourself to us in new ways through our scriptures, through our songs, through the teachings, and through each other. In your name we pray. Good morning. Welcome to Imago. We're so glad you're here today. In just a few minutes, we are going to take time to greet each other. You are welcome to drop your kiddos up through K in classrooms. If you walk straight down this back hallway, you can find yourself in the Parkview Hall, where you can find coffee and take a few minutes to get to know each other. Thanks. Morning again. Just a few announcements. If you are interested in going to the Interfaith event today at the synagogue down the street at 4, if you have not RSVP'd, you are still welcome. Just let Josh know that you're going to be there so he can let the powers that be know that you're going to be there. Also, we have some new small groups coming. They're starting in March for the Lenten season, and they are going to be short-term opportunities and a great way for you to get to know some new people in the church or connect with people and just kind of deepen your journey as we walk through the Lenten season. So if you are interested in joining any of those, you can either sign up at the info booth in the lobby or let Pastor Dustin know. We are also starting off the Lenten season with our Ash Wednesday service, which will be Wednesday, February 26th. That's this Wednesday at 7 p.m. It's a kind of a quiet, more contemplative, reflective service to kind of start off the season of Lent when we are walking and kind of deepening our relationship with Christ as we go towards Maundy Thursday and Good Friday and eventually Easter. So join us for that. You will receive ashes, or we'll receive ashes in communion together. Today, after church, there will be no adult Sunday school classes, and that is so that we can make room for our parent life group, which will meet today from 10:30 to 11:30. That's in Parkview Hall, again, straight down the hallway. You can join us and come and chat with each other, connect with other families in Imago, and talk to parents who have kind of been there before. Any questions and concerns, just kind of things that happen in all of our family lives. We can have an opportunity to chat about that. And finally, we are having a clothing drive that will be going on from March 1st through the 15th for Family Corps. So we are helping to kind of stock their resource closet. Kids in foster homes, we know, sometimes have to change homes with kind of a moment's notice, and so their resource closet provides some of the supplies that they need to do that. So we're looking for new clothing for all sizes and all genders. You can drop those off at the donation center, which is also in our lobby. And if you have any questions, you can talk to Christina. I'm going to invite Jasper up to read our scripture.
This morning's passage comes to us from 2 Timothy 3, verses 13 through 17. Everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, but evil people and impostors will flourish. They will deceive others and will themselves be deceived. But you must remain faithful to the things you have been taught. You know they are true, for you know you can trust those who taught you. You have been taught the Holy Scriptures from childhood, and they have given you wisdom to receive the salvation that comes by trusting in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is inspired by God and is useful to teach us what is true and to make us realize what is wrong in our lives. It corrects us while we are wrong and teaches us to do what is right. God uses it to prepare and equip His people to do every good work. This is the word of the Lord.
Yeah, so that's excellent. Wasn't that good? So, first, before we jump into the message, what stood out to you in that text, in that reading this morning? What are your thoughts around that? By the way, it's very clear that the good weather has brought you all out. I'm hiding on this day, so I am grateful to see your shadows. What else?
There's actually context around that verse that's so often spouted completely out of context.
Yeah. Say more about that.
People use 3:16 to talk about the Bible being the literal Word of God, and really it says, I hate to say the Bible clearly says, but the Bible clearly says right there that it's giving you wisdom that exceeds salvation.
Yeah.
It's useful for that. And
Yeah.
it's like,
I love that it gives you wisdom. It really, we've talked about that in this series deeply, right? Like that, how the Bible is a source of joining an ancient conversation of wisdom, this collective wisdom, that beauty of Scripture over spans of time. Yeah, it's interesting. What else? Yeah.
He's not talking about the New Testament.
yeah, Paul is not talking about the New Testament here in this letter to Timothy, because it wasn't put together yet. He's talking about the Hebrew Bible. Yeah.
Pretty clear evidence against the prosperity gospel of everyone who wants to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will suffer persecution.
Yeah, that's very interesting because the prosperity gospel basically says, right, like if you give and you're faithful and you do good and you have enough faith, God will bless you with a Rolls Royce and a mansion. And it seems to only work for the pastors. Yeah. What else? Yes.
Looking at verse 13, it says, but evil people and impostors will flourish. That's a very frightening message.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of trust and faith to become relational with people who are just meeting.
Yeah.
Those imposters can be anywhere. They can be anybody. You can be people who fully believe that they are walking with God.
It's difficult to discern, to use that wisdom in understanding, what is truth, And when I think about that a little bit, what helps me, the disciples asked Jesus, what is the most important commandment? And Jesus could have listed off the 10 Commandments. He could have listed off the book of Leviticus. He could have just said, anything written. But he just basically sums it up and says the way you can basically test something by its fruit, or you can test it and know if it's good or not, is the fruit that it bears. Well, what's the fruit that it bears? Is it how Jesus comes with the law of loving God and loving others? And so for me, when I read Scripture, the way that I really sense and discern what is good fruit, what is truth, is does this cause harm to others, or does it help them grow in their love for God? Does this cause harm to others, or is it increase their love, and is it extension of God's love in their lives, right? And so to me, I describe sin as anything that can cause harm to creation or to created. And I've said that before. But I think it's important to think about that, because when you're trying to discern what is truth and where should you lead, where should you go, I think sometimes you also have to just start with if this is good, then what is bad? And how do you get there, right? Those are questions one has to wrestle with. Instead of just, that's just always been considered bad, that's that, right? One has to think deeply about those things and lean on it. Yeah, Jerry?
Well, I spoke to what I used for a here. Is this kind and is it true and is it necessary?
Yeah.
That kind of crucial out there.
Yeah. Is it kind, is it true, is it necessary? Those are good three questions. Nope, nothing. Joel, was that a stretch or a hand? Nope, stretch. Okay. Good moment for you. Yeah, man.
We have a responsibility to make sure that we learn that who is teaching us, that we trust the sources that we can talk about. So it's not just on the people who are teaching, but on us to be able to discern that for ourselves, especially as we get older, because it talks a lot about those who have taught you.
Yeah.
And not that we shouldn't expose ourselves to other ideas and things we disagree with, but really discerning the quality of the sources that we're getting our information from and what we're choosing to put our faith in. I think is important, especially when it comes to extrapolating from Scripture.
Yeah, that makes me think a little bit about Jay Rudd was in the Reconstruct small group, and we read through the book, What is the Bible Right About by Rob Bell. And the last week he said, he says a lot of things, historical background, context, but he doesn't have any footnotes in here. Where did he get these historical backgrounds, context? He's like, I want to go and find the sources he resourced, or what he referenced in the footnote, but there is no footnote. And I thought, yes, that's a great way to think deeply about it, instead of just assuming, this person said this in this book, so that must be true. It's like, let's dig deeper. Where did they get that from? What is their source? One of my greatest icons that I look up to in the faith, his name is Stan Mitchell, and he's one of the leaders of the interdenominational movement within the United States. And he basically says, if you want to know what I think, then read who I read. And I think that's a great way to sense where people are coming from. So a lot of times you see quotes that I put up on the screen, likely those are the people I'm reading, right? Those are the people I'm often looking to. So sometimes if you want to know more, go to those sources. That's probably where I'm reading and getting my thoughts from as well and being formed. Not that that's my only lens, but I'll say that that's often my primary lens. What else? Yeah.
Okay, this basically points out, as I've seen a lot of scriptures, this pretty much points out, like, you know, if you do God's will and you don't sin, you know, and you have complete total faith, that you'll be blessed. But if you sin, you know, but if you sin, well, you know the outcome. But to me, okay, do you think that, like as it says here, when the evil flourish or end up being blessed, or like the wicked end up being blessed, and you know those who don't sin, you know they those who don't sin, you know they get mad and they look at the wicked and they're like, okay, what's wrong here? You know, I've done this and this and this and whatever, and this isn't sin, and they're getting blessed. Okay, what's wrong here? Do you think that right there could be like a test of faith?
I think that the way that I think about it is it's all a mystery, and that in Scripture we see our ancient ancestors proposing lots of options. You know, I've said it before, the Israelites thought God was testing them. The Israelites thought God was punishing them. Job thought God was testing them. His friends thought that God was punishing. Ecclesiastes says, who the heck knows? And Jesus often says, well, it's just the glory of God can be seen when I heal this person. Right? So you have all these different perspectives on why bad things, good things happen. None of us fully know, right? We wrestle with the tension. But we know that both those who do good and those who do evil, which quite frankly would be all of us, because we all sin and we all make choices that are not helpful to others, or are self-centered or self-focused. But either way, we know that good happens and evil or lack of such happens in all of our lives, right? Regardless. Now, for me personally, I've come to conclude that I think that this is, again, who the heck knows, but I'm doing my best. I've come to think that I don't think God punishes sin. I think our sin reaps a consequence in itself.
Yes.
So our bad choices will reap a natural consequence. It's not God up there going, all right, you did it the fourth time. We're putting you in the corner, right? Like that. I don't think that. Maybe, but maybe. I don't know. I mean, literally, if I could sit down with God and have some Starbucks, I'd ask.
People have referenced the sentence with people of positive will flourish. I feel like I should point out that this is not my favorite translation of this passage.
Yeah.
The NIV and the NASB both say evil people will go from bad to worse. So that to me says more that evil people are getting worse.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that. I mean, it doesn't mean they're not going to flourish. I don't think the best translations actually say evil people are going to be.
Yeah.
They're going to do awesome.
Which I'm glad that evil people are going to do awesome, right? Yeah, no, it does. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the point you just made is so you just brought up another translation that translates that line differently, which makes a great point that each translation is someone else's translation of the Greek or the Hebrew, right? That they're looking at the Greek and the Hebrew in the original text that's written and going, okay, how does this make most sense to me? What does this make most sense in this context? How is this word used in other parts of Scripture that would seem consistent, right? So what we have is a translation of someone's translation, right? So, yeah, Mike?
Which points to that we cannot trust those who taught us.
Yeah. It's not as face value on everything. Not everything that we were taught maybe is truly helpful. Yeah.
Another version like that too. Paul is our author here.
Yeah.
Okay. He learned from the Hebrew from the time he was a child.
Yeah.
But he was deceived and was very critical about the way he saw life.
Yeah.
Until after this mountain of dirt, before he woke up and saw that.
Yeah.
So I think he's kind of like, I don't know where he's coming from here exactly, but I did read that several times before I understand exactly what he's trying to tell Timothy.
Yeah.
You know, to be very cautious about who you're
it seems as such. Yeah. So let's dive in here a little bit. And one of the things I want us to talk about before we really dive in is I want us to explore. Imago has 5 directives, and if you want to read all of those and dig into what our directives are that sort of guide us and lead us and root us as a church and have been a part of our foundations of who we are in forming this unique community here in Peoria. But there are 2 that I really want us to uplift today and look at as we explore this idea of what Scripture means in our own lives. Something that is God-breathed or God-inspired. So one of our directives is process, meaning we honor everyone's journey of faith. We exist to walk alongside people as they seek to discover deeper levels of faith and intimacy with God, wherever they are in the process. And so basically, what this says is that each of us are in different places in our spiritual journey. And you know as well as I do, I've had coffee or dinner or whatever with many of you, or sat down and talked with many of you. And I know that some of you are all over on a spectrum. Some of us in this room are identifying as more of an agnostic and saying, you know what, I just don't know what I believe or think anymore. I'm really wrestling. I know there's something out there. I know that God looks a certain way, but I just don't know what that looks like, and so I'm exploring. There's others of us who go, I don't know if I'd even say I'm a Christian, but I love the teachings and ways and life of Jesus, and I am just trying my best to model my life after the life of Jesus. And others of us in this space, in this room, would say, no, I 100% believe that Jesus is God, incarnate, in flesh, died, rose, lived a beautiful life that shows me how to live in this world, resurrected, and will one day come again, right? There's this wide spectrum, and then there's a bunch of stuff probably in between all that, right? We're all over the place when it comes to these things. And I think a lot of that has to do because this church is unique. It's not for everybody. But it's for a lot of people who don't fit in other churches, whether that's for a variety of reasons. And this is a safe place. And one of the ways I know how to describe it is growing up in the tradition I grew up in, there came a point when it didn't feel safe anymore. And I only know how to describe this as I felt like a refugee. I basically felt like a place that was familiar, that had nurtured me and loved me, that I was so familiar with, spoke my language, that I had so many memories with. Eventually I just felt like, this place isn't safe for me anymore. I gotta get out of here. Now it's safe for other people, and they stayed, and it was good for them. But for me, because I had certain questions or doubts or didn't believe certain things the way that they did anymore, it didn't feel safe. And I'll tell you what, along my journey, there were other places and other church communities that took me in, and they felt so foreign. 2 of those being the United Church of Christ and the United Methodist Church. I was like, why is that person wearing a robe? Why are they having all these pageantry and bells and whistles? Like, what are these written prayers I'm praying? I was just like totally in a foreign world. I didn't know what was happening. But it was in that place that I, for the first time, felt safe to question, to doubt, to not believe everything exactly the way that I had been taught. And I will tell you, I missed home. I missed the familiarity. I missed going to church with my family. It was hard. And the hardest part was that sometimes it felt like people in the mainline tradition that took this little refugee and said, you can come here, this is a safe place. They were also kind of like, but you need to assimilate. You need to say the prayers the way we say it, and you need to preach the way we preach. I would preach in those churches, and someone would come up to me after and go, you didn't grow up Methodist, did you? I'd say, no, I didn't. And when they would say that, deep down what it would do is it would hurt, because it would basically felt like them saying, you're never going to be Methodist. When you come here, you're always going to have an accent. You're from that country, and we welcome you here, but you have an accent. And we know you're never quite going to fit, because you didn't quite grow up in this town and in this church like this. And that hurt. That was hard. But in the same way, what I began to navigate was I began to find meaning in truths or in traditions that never had meaning to me before. And so all of a sudden there were certain songs and certain liturgy that growing up didn't have a meaning to me, and now I found meaning in them. And there were people that I felt were so foreign, and then I began to build a relationship with them, and I felt like I was having a new family. And I'll tell you what, somebody asked me yesterday, we had a pastor who was here for our anti-racism event, he said, how are you doing at this church? And I said, out of all the churches I've served, this feels like the best fit. I feel at home. I feel like this just works. And I think it works because a lot of us in this room, I feel like it works because a lot of us in this room, not all of us, but a lot of us, are refugees from churches that just didn't fit. And I'm a mutt. I come from a lot of different faith Christian traditions, and it's been in this church that it's been refreshing to be able to just uplift all these different parts of the different traditions. And there isn't just one faith tradition, Lutheranism or Episcopalianism or evangelicalism, that is the way or the way that we do it or the right way. It is, what are the things that those different Christian traditions each bring that enrich our faith? Process, meeting people where they are in their journey of faith, and with what they bring in the bags they bring to this place, and saying, that's good enough. And we meet you here. And then the directive of Christian. We at Imago are committed to a historic Orthodox Christian faith. It's found in the Apostles' Creed. We're committed to a generous orthodoxy. Hold on to that word. We're going to talk about that. Under a banner of love and grace. As such, we commit ourselves to faithful reading and study of the Bible, finding new and creative ways to live out what it teaches. Let's sit with me for a minute and what this looks like. I think sometimes in Imago, we do a good job creating space for people in the process who are sitting in uncertainty. But for those who have certainty, we're kind of like, whoa, you have a lot of certainty about that thing, right? And I think that we have, and as we're going to be 12 years old next month, and I think that we're at a teenage age where I think we are going to have to continue to live into what does it look like to be okay with the person who is uncertain about things, which we do really good at, and what does it look like to be okay with the person who walk alongside them in the process who's just like, I feel pretty certain about these things. And to say, that's awesome, I'm glad you're there. I may not be, or I may want to be really bad, but I'm glad you're there. So how can we meet people in the process in both of those places? I think another thing that's really important about understanding and living into what it means to be generous in our orthodoxy is to live deeply into that there's a culture in our church that's different than maybe some of the churches that we grew up in. What I mean by that is growing up as a kid and as a teenager and then in college, whatever the pastor said up front, if I didn't agree with that, I knew that I was out of step with where the church was headed. I was not in line with good teaching. I was supposed to agree with whatever the pastor said up front, because that was the authority from God. And if you questioned that, you were out of line. And I think one of the most beautiful things about this church that I love is that when I preach, or someone gets up and does a soapbox sermon, or Dustin and Christina share, you do not have to agree with them to exist in this place. You don't have to agree with them to have a voice or a presence, because that's not the kind of church we are, because we need people in the process. Because we're generous with our orthodoxy. Here's the thing that I think we have to continue to live into as a church as we push into 2020 and into being 12 years old. I think that we have to continue to be a people who can sit in a pew and hear something we don't agree with and go, I don't really agree with that, and maybe I need to ask that person to coffee to figure out why they think that. Well, I don't really agree with that, and they laid it all out, and I still don't agree, and that's okay. Or they laid it all out, and that's interesting. I have something to take home and think about. But so to be generous listeners as well as generous sharers. And I'm going to admit this morning that this is an area of growth for me. To be a generous sharer. I grew up in fundamentalist evangelicalism, where basically certainty was everything. I had fire insurance. I knew I wasn't going to hell. I was going to heaven. And sometimes my brain wants to switch all the way over to fundamentalism on the liberal side. I want to be certain about things, but just with more liberal fonts. And I always have to resist the urge to do that. And I'm grateful for folks in this church who call me on the carpet, literally, in mine, and say, hey, sometimes maybe we can offer that more generously. Last week, one of my colleagues, Bill, was here. And I watched Bill's sermon after I got lots of texts from folks all over the spectrum of last week's service. And one of the things I picked up on was that Bill is an Orthodox Lutheran. This is the truth, this is the way it is, this is what he believes. And Bill's tone came across in that way in every single way possible. Because he does not hold what we hold, which is the generous orthodoxy. That maybe this is what I believe, and this is what I've come to see as truth and wisdom as I've studied, but maybe not everyone in the room does. And I think Bill's tone, his inability to maybe offer something up with an open hand to say, this is what's true for me, but may not necessarily be true for you. I think it hurts some folks in the room, and here's why, and I've done this before. Here's why. Sometimes when I present my views, I present them on the defense instead of the offense. Basically, like, here's what I used to think, and here's what I think now. Instead of, here's what I think. And basically, when you just say, here's what I used to think, I think it can cause harm and hurt to people who still think that. And I think part of being a church that offers generous orthodoxy with our family members, with our friends, with those whom we encounter in our lives, day to day, with our church family, is to be generous with our orthodoxy, be generous with our beliefs, in essence. Is to be able to say, this is what I believe, and I know you may believe something different. And I'm going to create space for that, because for me, I am responsible for myself. And because I think Jesus continually, over and over again, he had dinner with both the sinners and the Pharisees. And I got news for you, Pharisees. You too were sinners. You just didn't call yourself that. But he had dinner with both of them. Even though there were things he agreed and didn't agree with both of them. And he had hard conversations with both of them. So I think that's what part of following Jesus is about. So for Lent, we're going to be going through a series called Conversations with Jesus. And it's going to be lessons from Jesus and how we can be more generous with one another in our convictions and in our conversations. Because it's okay to have certainty about certain things. It's okay to have convictions. But how can we present those in a way that Jesus did that doesn't completely shut people down or shut people out? And so I'm not going to rip on them. I'm going to rip on myself and say that I have always and will always probably need to continue to work on this in my own life to be a more generous listener and a more generous sharer. And when we invite folks into our church who maybe think differently than us or who come up here and have more certainty than us, may we extend them the same generosity in our listening. To say, I don't agree with that, and I really need to ask that person for coffee after. Or if you don't like coffee like me, not chocolate or something like that. I think that is what Jesus is calling to us. And I hope during Lent that we can explore this deeper together. I'll tell you a story of the way I think this looks practically. So my fire alarms decided they were all connected through electricity in the house, decided I'll just break at once. And thankfully I rent, so my landlord sent his fix-it guy over. And he sent him over, and this person walked in the door, and he came in, he said, where are your fire alarms? So I showed him. I got a ladder out, and he's up there, he's working on the thing. He says, oh, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a pastor. And sometimes I look at church and I just say, like, oh, I'm a social worker. Like if I'm out with friends and I really don't want to talk about religion and everything, I'll just basically go, oh, man, I work for a nonprofit. Because sometimes people just spew on you and you're like, I've had 2 drinks tonight. I don't want to do this right now. Like, I'm not my best. So in those nights, I work for a nonprofit. When they ask which one, I say, a religious one. And then, oh, what's that? So then, as he's taking it out, a pastor, wow, we got really excited, perked up. And he looked at me and he said, oh, what church? And I told him what church. And so I've never heard of that church. I said, what I told you, I said, well, it's not a church for everybody. I said, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I said, the people who are there often are marginalized, they're not accepted in a lot of other churches. I said, people who have been divorced or single after 22, people who've doubted certain things in their faith. I said, people who identify as trans or LGBTQ in any way, gay or an ally of the such. I said, people who maybe doubt certain things and didn't believe them exactly the way they were supposed to. These are the people who often are at my church. And his face, it was like a cat in a cage. And he just... Those of you who don't know that joke, I've got feral cats taking over my backyard. And he just looked at me with this shock and this horror, and he said, do you think those are moral? Beep, 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 beep. I tell you, right at that moment, the Holy Spirit just set those fire alarms off. Because I wanted to be like, no! And he got to stop, and I answered his question. I said, I think throughout time, there are certain people or groups that we have deemed as unclean or unacceptable. And I think through wisdom and through scripture and ancient conversation, we've been able to see that these people are beautiful and whole, just the way they are. And he just looked at me. And, he said. And then again, bing, bing! And I said, I'm just going to leave you to do this. Not that this is my way out, but I just don't want to have this conversation. And I said, I'm going to leave you this, I'm going to go to the kitchen. So he fixed everything, and he came downstairs and said, okay, it's all done. And I said, okay, great, awesome, thanks so much, you have a great day, let me guide you out. And then he texted me like a day later, and he said, hey, is everything working fine? I said, yeah, but actually this other one's beeping in this other hallway, could you come back and look at that? And he said, oh, sure, I would love to. And I just felt this thing in my stomach that was like, this guy wants to have a conversation. Can you not tell? Why are you avoiding him? Ask him if he wants to have some hot chocolate after. So I said, okay. And I texted him and said, hey, it seemed like you wanted to continue our talk. Would you like to have some hot chocolate after you finish the fire smoke detectors? He said, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I really do. So he fixed that fire detector, and while we were fixing the smoke detector, not the fire detector, whatever it's called, he was like, so what do you do for a living again? Or where did you go to school? I said, Moody. He said, oh yeah, I read that on your website. I'm like, oh, you've stalked me. And he said, I really want to go to Moody myself. I'm like, oh, that's really neat. What makes you want to go to Moody? He says, well, I serve at the rescue mission with my family. We actually sold our home, and we live right downtown by the rescue mission so that we can be integrally involved in that community, in that part of town. And I just really love ministry and serving people who are in need. And I'm like, wow, that's so fascinating. And asked him a few more questions about it. And finally, we made our way to the dining room table where hot chocolate I had prepared, which was lukewarm now. But she was prepared to spit it out for what I was about to tell him. And he said, what's your view of Scripture? It seems like it's really different. So I laid it out. And what my view of Scripture was. And he'd come back every so often with like a counter verse or something that he'd like, what about this or what about that? I would have a response. After an hour of this, he just stopped and he said, you seem to really know your stuff. I'm talking to a pastor. And he's 19. He was homeschooled, and he graduated from high school when he was 15. He started taking classes at the community college. And he said, I don't really know what to respond to some of the things you're saying. Would you mind if I went and talked to some of my friends and then came back? And I said, are you Jehovah's Witness? And he basically said, I basically responded, and I stopped and I took a deep breath. And I said, let me just be honest with you. I'm sitting across the table from you, and I'm looking at you, and I'm literally seeing myself. I said, I used to sit across tables with people and have them share their views, and then go and talk to my friends about what I could say back to them as a rebuttal to get them to think what I thought. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you. Everything I've shared with you today, I don't need you to view Scripture the way I view it. I don't need you to think about God the way I think about God, or to think about the church the way that I think it should be done. I said, I can tell from sitting here with you that you met the same Jesus I did when I grew up in evangelical fundamentalism. And I can tell you love Jesus and desire to serve Jesus, and not just Jesus, but Jesus' people, because your whole family's been uprooted to serve people who are in need. I said, so I don't need you to believe anything I believe. You and I are in sync. We are Christian brothers. I'm just sharing with you because you asked. He took a deep breath, sat with that for about 30 seconds, and he said, but your lifestyle is immoral. And I just need you to believe this, because if you don't, you're going to go to hell. And at that point, I wished the fire alarm went off. But instead, I just can't describe it as anything more than the Spirit just sort of grabbed hold of my tongue and said, remember, you used to say the same things to people. And so I just looked across the table at him and I said, I understand why you think that. I do. I used to think it myself. And I said, I've got a story that I'll share with you sometime if you want to continue the conversation of why I changed my views. I said, but I just need you to know that I think that you are awesome because you love Jesus and are doing good in the world by loving others. And I think that's all God calls us to, is to love God and love others. And we don't need to view Scripture the same to get there. And he said, do you mind if I take some time to think about this and get back to you if I want to get together again? And I said, absolutely. I said, just please promise me that when we get together again, it won't be rooted in some deep sense of contempt to convert, but instead an open conversation. And he said, I think I can promise that. And we got up and hugged, and I walked him out the door, and he fired off again. Demons or the spirit or something in them pushed this conversation forward. But I'm going to tell you that this week, thinking about what played out Sunday with generous listening and generous sharing, or the lack thereof at sometimes, I thought I needed this to remind me how important it is to have these conversations with folks. And I think that we as a church and myself need to be reminded that even though there are people who may not view Scripture just like I do, or view God just like I do, or don't think church should function the same way that I do, that the Spirit and God is still in it. And there is still so much good in it. And God still uses and works and moves in both of our lives. Because if I don't believe that, that means that God has not been using Christians for thousands of years. And the people whose faith I sit on and the wisdom that I look upon, then that means that somehow they were actually following Jesus. And I just don't believe that. I think that God is in it all. There's wisdom in it all. And the Spirit is using it all. One of the things we'll talk about in the series on Lent is when the disciples and Jesus are having a conversation, and the disciples come to Jesus, and they think this is going to be an attaboy moment, and they say, guess what? We saw some people casting demons out of somebody, and they were doing it in Jesus' name, but we told them, you're not a part of our group. You're not a part of our 12. Only we're the ones who are supposed to do that. And Jesus is like, what the heck? Why would you do that? And he says, if someone is not against you, they're for you. In essence, that person had a demon, and they may not be a part of our 12 little group here, but they're still doing good in the world. They still help that person. They are for you. God is using that even if it doesn't have the name Jesus on it. Because that is the way God moves and works in the world. I don't know how long I've been preaching, but I have a lot more to say, and I probably need to figure out how to sum this up. Our passage this morning, it tells us that all Scripture is breathed by God. And I think that in the Greek, or all Scripture is inspired by God, and in the Greek, the best way to understand this is that it's God-breathed. In Scripture, we see two moments where there seems to be a breathing of God on people. But there are several, but there's two that I'm going to primarily bring out. One, we have Adam and Eve, right, breathing life into them. And then we have another moment with Jesus and the disciples breathing the Spirit into them. What I think is interesting about both of those is that it's not just God isolated, it's God and human in partnership. And I think that to me is what Scripture is. It's God and human in partnership. Writing down wisdom and their experiences and understandings with each other. And from that, I think there is great wisdom for us to gain. Peter Enns says in his book, wisdom leads us to dialogue with the past, it doesn't lead us back to the past. I think if we can understand that truth, that this book that we have is not just words on a piece of paper put together that has no meaning or heart to it. No, it is a book of great wisdom that our ancient ancestors wrote down. Why? Because they saw value and beauty in sharing that and passing that down to the generations, because there was something we could glean from it. And that doesn't mean we have to agree or believe everything in it, but there's so much truth to guide us in this life now. So much ancient wisdom and truth. And I'm going to tell you what, one of the things that I love about my grandma is the little voice messages she leaves. Sometimes I don't answer my phone just so she has to leave a voicemail. Then I save it and I send it to my email, and then I put it on my computer because I know there will be a day. Because I've talked to so many people who grieve, who just say, I wish I could hear their voice one more time. And I'm saving on my computer because there's going to be a point when I'm going to want to go back and I'm going to want to listen to her voice and her wisdom. And I'd say, I would agree with everything my grandma says her face. But that doesn't mean that everything isn't good. And I'm going to listen. And there will be a day when I will be so glad to hear her voice. And there is a day now I'm so glad that our ancient ancestors from Judaism and Christianity wrote down these words. And I may not agree with all of them. I'm glad I can still hear their voice. The last part of this passage this morning says, it is useful to teach us what is true and to make us realize what is wrong in our lives. It corrects us when we are wrong and teaches us to do what is right. God uses it to prepare and equip his people to do every good work. What are the examples I think of when I think about the way that Scripture prepares us is I'm not much of a farmer in any way, but I do remember when I spent some time in Kentucky, and there was a particular man in our church who there were whole sprints of time he would come because it was harvest season, and he needed to get the harvest in. And I remember not seeing him for a while and thinking, I feel so disconnected from him. So I thought, you know what? Sometimes people can't come to the church. I'm going to go to him. And so I texted him up one day. I said, can I spend the day with you on the tractor and just kind of learn what you do? And just basically be able to talk. And so we did. And he taught me a lot of different things and elements. And I was reminded this week of a few things that were interesting. One is that there's a picture here, if you can show it, cornfields. As they're harvesting, right? They're taking the corn, they're going to use it to sell in the market. But then after they're done with that, the field basically has the lower part that's already been harvested. And that portion is left all through basically then the winter, and then when it comes time to spring, they begin the next picture. They till it all up. And they take what is basically has been left all year, and they take what is dead or was not used, and they put it into the soil to be used in the next year's crop. Cultivate it. Make the soil even richer for next year, so that the next seed that comes from it, the next crop that is yield from it, will be even healthier. So everything is used. Everything has a purpose. And when I think about this, I can't help but stop and think about my own life. All that I've learned in the Bible, what is correct, what is just, what is right, all the fruit that I've yielded from it, all the goodness that has come from it, the harvest that has made me who I am today. But the story doesn't end there. There's a lot that I believe that really isn't integrated into who I am per se. It isn't, I didn't take it and hold on to it, I just left it in the field. I didn't harvest it, I didn't use it. It was maybe meaningless. But I tell you what, there came a point when what I left in the field was just tilled into my soul and used to yield the next year's harvest and make something even better. There are many things in my faith journey that I have left behind that I don't believe anymore. But I am who I am because of them, not despite them. I am who I am, and the new crop that is yielded in my heart and the new things that I believe came because of what was reintegrated into the soil. To the dead that was just left behind, that people thought had no purpose anymore until the next season. It was all filled up and reintegrated into the soil. A new seed was planted, a new life was formed. Who I was and what I believed is still who I am, even though it may not be exactly right. I think part of being a church that meets people in their process and being generous with their orthodoxy is to be a people who can look at who we used to be and what we used to believe. To say, that's still part of the soil. Part of the reason why they leave those there so long is the roots go deeper and deeper into the ground. And when they get ripped up and integrated back into the soil, it makes it even richer. And for those of you who are in deconstruction or questioning or wrestling with your faith, those roots may be deep, but they still have purpose. They still have goodness, and they're still integrated in all of who you are. My prayer for us as we enter into year 12 of life as a church is that we will be generous people with our listening, generous people with our sharing, making space for people wherever they are in the journey. To be people who are on the offense and not the defense, To be people who are always willing to listen and have the hard conversations over the sound of a fire alarm. To be people who try to put ourselves in the shoes of others and sometimes see ourselves standing in those very shoes. To be people who are loving in a world that just tries to draw lines in the sand and build walls and take down bridges. Can you put the image of Conversations with Jesus up for the next series? Lindsay, can you just give us a little wave? She did a beautiful job designing this image. And I want, she just explained to me, and I want the worship team to come as well, why we have it this way. It's a bridge. And it's not just any bridge, it's a bridge that's covered in fog. Because sometimes trying to reach across the aisle and have a conversation with somebody who thinks very differently than you, you have no idea where that's leading. It's muggy, it's unclear. But the bridge is there for a reason. And I think Jesus stands on both sides of the bridges, walking with us and meeting with us on the other side, calling us, beckoning us to be better, to do better, to love others, even those who think differently than us, to be people of conviction and conversation. Because I think that's the only way for the songs we sing today to become true, for us to be one. For us to be one. That is my prayer for us as we enter year 12. Imago. Let's be one. You stand with me and sing this final song together. I invite you to come if you wish to put a prayer on the prayer pallet, on the prayer candle, or you can meet Mandy by the pastor's study there if you would like prayer for anything. May we be one. May we know we are loved. May we let others know. Thank you, Lord.
Calling out on the water, great unknown, fear they fair. Terrified in the mystery, oceans deep, and faith will stand. And I will call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. The ocean cries, the soul rests in your embrace. I am yours. You are mine. Grace abounds between us waters, sovereign hand, be my God. Never fear surrounds me, never fail, won't start now. I will call upon your name. Keep my eyes above the waves. Don't rise, the soul will rest in your embrace. I am yours. You are mine. Savior,
Please remain standing for the benediction. May the people we used to be still be a part of the people we are. May we learn to be more generous in our listening and in our sharing. And may we create a space that feels like home for others. Go in grace and peace.